3.1 Practice and Research Project 8. In this second video, I'm going to talk about how I am now adapting and making further investigations to my chosen textile technique, which is knitting. As I've already explained, I've practiced with several types of knitting, finger knitting, hand knitting using the hand. I've also used the arm for larger scale stitch work. Not particularly very good with traditional wooden knitting needles and so forth, because I was never very good, or I'm not very good with the tension on that. So when I engaged in generating the French knitted cord, as I was processing these ideas and working and refining some of the sampling, I'd come to the conclusion that I wanted to go large scale with the French knitted cord. And so what I have done to adapt to this technique is I have engaged in using a pom-pom hat maker. Now, when this machine is rigged with the wool thread, it's threaded through and you cast on. Now, the process is very similar to the French knitting, only we work in a circular motion and the wool thread goes round and catches the stitches. That will sit on the table, and eventually, after about 3 to 4 balls of wool, you are then engaging with a tubular type shape. Now, I've just shown these as demonstrations that tubular shape can be as long as you wish, 1 metre long, 2 metres long, but then what the sample produces is a hollow tube. And here we can see that I've embedded a board. Now, what the tube will do under further investigations is I can hook threads through the circle and generate a gather, which is giving me texture to the already texturized stitches. Now, on this century board, I have adapted my 3-dimensional circles and just inserted the board, which could either be played with via the hands again, going back to using the hands as a platform. But what I want to demonstrate here is how I have now adapted this technique with my wool thread to suit my needs with my experimentation. These have been just filled with acetate paper and just elasticated to hold the material. As we can see, they are very flexible, tactile. The material has now become constructed and is strong, soft and pliable. That could either be mounted to the wall or it could sit flat on the table. One thing that I do like about these, which will lead to further investigation, is the idea of playing with noise. The noise of the sensory textiles. A further development from this, I've been able to play around a little bit more with the gathering inside the tube. So you are literally knitting a tube inside out, and then when that tube is cast off, you pull it inside out as if it was the long tube of a sock. And then again, I've inserted onto a board. As we can see, I created gathers through here, which makes it tactile. And then I made a larger scale, chunky, circular 3-dimensional shapes. Further development of the tube leads to this. Now the tube, once it was knitted large scale, which again uses approximately 3 to 4 balls of wool, this again has now been padded out, but this has been padded out with children's play balls, and in particular these coloured balls have been overlaid with red acetate, and we can now see that this has become a very flexible, strong, tactile dyslexia textile sample. It still has the flexibility and the manoeuvrability. It's very three-dimensional, and again we can see that I'm using the hands as a platform to play around. I will work on further investigations with movement and the body and shapes that this textile sample has produced. But this has been adapted just through knitting a tubular piece of fabric. The conclusion to finding this as a technique that I feel that really works for me, I feel that it enables me to work with some of my dyslexic traits of problem solving. It is very visual. It's also quite therapeutic, and I can see the process of something building and getting larger and larger as the knitted piece starts to expand. The more product that we use, the more material that we use, the more balls of wool. And I think it has now started to encourage me the possibilities of how I can now work with this just as one technique on its own and start to further my investigations more into the ideas of sensory samples and sensory textiles. I didn't particularly like working with the colour red, but as I have worked through the processes of working with different materials and looking at the interaction of colour, the colours are actually also changing the reds within the reds. This, for example, as we hold it into the light, throws shimmers of pink. And then as we look further into the samples, we see deeper maroon, reds, and darker shades and tones. So this sample is now starting to work with my colour and materials and tactility of the circle.